Chatting Tracks. Let's talk music.
Hi, it's Wobby. It's Chatting Tracks. Let's talk music. Let's talk music indeed. Welcome to today's episode. I've got an absolute belter for you today, so thanks for joining me. What I love about my channel is it's so diverse. You know, I don't just cover rock and pop and funk and soul and the Beatles and the Bowies and Stones and the Arctic Monkeys and things like that. We cover as much music as we can on this channel. And I love it when people reach out to me and say, I'd love to come on and talk about my new album. Well, Lao Tizer reached out to me, who's a smooth jazz pianist. He's got a new album that's just come out called Amplify, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. It's so interesting as well. So I had him on just to talk about it. So we talked about his career. He's been a musician since he was 18 years old. He's done many albums that are really interesting and worked with some fantastic people. And also he's been playing at the Baked Potato in LA, the famous club, the Baked Potato, run by Don Randy. Anyway, so I had him on for about an hour and he's such a cool guy. He's agreed to let me play some tracks during the interview. So every now and again you get a little bit of a music break. And that's all Lao's music from the new album Amplify. And while you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe, because it turns out people that have been watching for a little while and new people don't subscribe, and we need to get this channel out there to get more music into more people's ears, and I can give you new artists and discover some more people. Because you might find someone you never heard before and really enjoy it and go, I'm going to check that out a little bit more. And it's because when you like and subscribe, it helps me do that. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one. Love and peace. If I can go back a bit, was there lots of music in your house growing up? Was your parents heavily into music?
My parents, my dad was heavily into music, but nobody played music. The only musician in my lineage actually is my great-grandfather on my father's side, who I guess I met when I was a little kid, like little, like when I was a baby. But I don't remember meeting him. And he was a piano teacher. He emigrated here from Russia back on, I think they came around 1910, something like that. So he was a Russian piano teacher. That's the only lineage on either side of my family of people that play, right? But my dad grew up in kind of a society family outside Philadelphia, and they used to go to a lot of classical shows. And there's a place there called the Curtis Institute. They used to do all kinds of, he was exposed to all that growing up. And then of course my parents are baby boomers, so I was kind of exposed to growing up. Like, he had a huge LP collection of classical, world music, like really eclectic world music, all kinds of stuff, Japanese shakuhachi, music of the Sufis, Native American stuff, all kinds of stuff. And then kind of the music that my parents grew up with. So, Buddy Holly and Sam Cooke and Motown and Elvis and Janis Joplin, maybe a little bit of Jimi Hendrix. They weren't really like classic rock people. They were like the couple years before that. So most of the music I grew up hearing was like the 50s and 60s. The one thing that they weren't into, and that my dad isn't into, is jazz. So I wasn't actually exposed to jazz at all until I got my first jazz albums when I was about 16. But yeah, so I grew up with a very diverse diet, hearing a diverse diet of music. And I'm sure that led to kind of my overall, admiration and desire to have like very eclectic set of flavors in the music that we do. And I'm sure that's a big part of where that came from. You know what I mean? Just I think whatever you're exposed to as a little kid, especially, is going to like kind of plant that seed in you, for the long term. So, yeah.
What album would you say, what album would you say is the album that really made you sort of, especially jazz, made you sort of lift your ears up and go, what is that? I would need to find out more about this and get into it.
Yeah, two. So, and one of them is going to be like probably the answer that many, many people would give, because it's, I think, basically the best-selling jazz album of all time, which is Kinda Blue, right? Miles Davis.
Lovely. Yeah.
And then Miles and Quincy live at Montreux. And the reason why those were the two is I was a member, I don't know if you guys have this in the UK or had it in the UK, the Columbia House Records Club. Did you guys ever have that?
It's something similar, yeah.
So all my friends in high school, I was growing up, it was CDs, right? Cassettes and CDs. I was in high school 1993 to 96, right? So that's what, LPs were kind of already phasing out. And certainly for kids, we weren't interested in LPs because they didn't seem cool, right? Now they do. Well, it didn't then. So I had, with Columbia House, you'd like buy 11, get one free, whatever. And then you remember and you had to, whatever. So through that is how I got those first two albums. And that's, that's kind of what opened my ears to it. to jazz in the first place. So those were the first two, and I was a junior in high school, and I used to get up on Sunday mornings and just listen to music, and so that was like my first appetizer into the jazz realm. And like I said, I mean, you're talking about In Kind of Blue, probably the most iconic jazz album of all time, right? So it's hardly a boutique one in that realm, at least.
It's an interesting album though, because it's really intense and it's also really uplifting at the same time. And
yeah, I mean, I really connected to. It's funny because as I grew up and started to learn about jazz history, whatever, of course, the pianist on there that everybody talks about is Bill Evans, right? I mean, there's a few guys on it, but the stuff that spoke to me, I remember the tracks that I liked the best early on, just on first listening, were Wynton Kelly, actually. He had this more kind of bluesy licks kind of approach, and I already had an ear for that because I was a huge fan of like classic rock, and the Allman Brothers were my favorite band in high school, right? So Chuck Leavell, the session guy, and Chuck Leavell was on all those records, Southbound and Jessica, and then of course Rolling Stones, and he was on Clapton Unplugged, which came out when I was in high school too. So I wouldn't say that Wynton Kelly and Chuck Leavell are the same, but there's a certain similarity in that, like, the approach was a little bluesier, licks oriented. Now, as you get older, or as I got older, you appreciate just the amazing depth of Bill Evans, harmonic sensibility and mood and all that. But initially, I think those were the tracks that I connected with the most. Actually, I should go back and look at the track list and remind myself of who's on what track. I believe Freddie the Freeloader is Wynton Kelly. I think
so, yeah.
I think he's on 2 or 3, and Bill Evans is on the others.
Tripping down this road like someone who's lost their way back home. Well, you've made it very clear, can't find your way back, no. This maze, you left me here to navigate through all of your angry words and hate. Well, you've made it very clear, can't find your way back, no, no. If you care to join me here, let's go. Well, you've made it very clear, can't find your way back, no, no. Tell me one thing that I can truly give to help you find your way out. Well, you've made it very clear, can't find your way back, no, no.
but that was, I guess, kind of why that seed had already been planted. And I already had an ear for blues, right? But jazz, I grew up with classical music, and as most pianists, I was taking classical piano lessons, right? So, for most classical players, jazz is a bit of a stretch. You're not kind of used to that harmonic, especially jazz as it evolved and got more and more adventurous harmonically. Almost sounds wrong at first when you're young and you're like so rooted in like the recreative mindset that is classical music and much more rules around harmony, whereas jazz kind of breaks those down and then expands them. It depends how you look at it, right? So I think all that is why it took me longer to connect to it, and also just not being exposed to it. Had my dad been a big jazz fan, I'm sure I would have been into it from the age of 3, and but hey, our paths are what they are, so
It's amazing that you've got something like Kind of Blue, like you're saying, which is intense and moody, and then you've got something like Take 5 by Dave Burberry, which is spacious yet driven at the same time, and obviously they give the drummer space to solo, and everybody breathes in that song, whereas you would
or like Blue Rondal a Turk, which has I can see why that connects, because that was there's definitely a classicalness to to the tune, right? So and there's always been that like symmetry for sure. I mean, some of my favorite stuff modern was the Avishai Cohen, Mark Juliana, Shy Maestro. I don't even know what that trio was called. It came out I guess that stuff came out around 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But that stuff, I love it. I still love it because it's very like it's got definitely strong classical roots in the writing, but it's like so hip rhythmically. It's like so hip and sophisticated rhythmically, yet really accessible from a harmonic and compositional standpoint. I guess for me, that's always kind of where my ear leans. I mean, I appreciate it all, but super avant-garde stuff, I don't connect to generally as deeply as I do to stuff that's a little bit like, I like composition, so I'm always going to lean towards great tunes, and accessible. I like harmony, and maybe you hear that in our music too. I like harmony and chord progressions that have melody within them. You know what I mean? So I tend to, that's just, we all have our things. So
it's interesting. You say sort of you were into jazz around 93, because obviously you've got the huge grunge movement going on. You've got all that stuff. At that time, myself, I was heavily into Steely Dan.
okay.
But it was a band that I would never tell anybody about. It was sort of, I was like, of course I like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, but at home, it was Steely Dan all the way. For yourself, was jazz the same? Was you quite open about your love for jazz around your friends and your peers, or did you keep it to yourself?
I don't remember. I mean, I probably tried to turn my friends onto it a bit, but I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which is kind of like especially in those years, Boulder, Colorado, when I was growing up, was a very hippie town, right?
Right.
And as the hippies got older and started to make money, they turned into yuppies. So it kind of changed its identity in my years growing up a little bit. But what was most popular among my friends in high school, we all loved classic rock. And then, of course, people were into like Nirvana, Pearl Jam. I mean, Temple of the Dog, Soundgarden, and then the early iconic hip hop stuff or rap, like Dr. Dre, The Chronic. I think that came out in '94. Like that was probably the biggest. Cypress Hill. So no, I just don't think my friends probably had an ear for it, really. So I certainly tried to expose my friends to other stuff. I remember later when I moved to Southern California, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit. So, I moved here right after high school, and my first friends here, we all graduated college the same year. High school the same year. I never went to college. They were both in college. And like my first couple friends that I met in Southern California, and they were really, it was like the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And, that's when Santana, like Smooth came out. I forgot what the name of that record is. Is the record called Smooth? Smooth was the biggest track.
That's right.
And everybody was, and I was like trying to be like, guys, you don't even know Santana. Like, you got to listen to like, Abraxas and like the classic stuff. And I'm like, so I was always trying to turn them on to like music that I thought had kind of where that stuff was coming from. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know that a lot of kids. I'm not sure that classic rock was so popular among my peers my age in other cities. I don't really know that. Colorado has its kind of own identity. I mean, as every place does, right? So I'd be curious to know. I've never really asked other like people my age, like, what were you really into in high school? Because certainly among my group of friends, that was the number one thing. The Grateful Dead. We went to Grateful Dead shows.
Awesome.
Went saw the Allman Brothers at Red Rocks. Cat Stevens, like all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting.
I just remember I had long hair then, like we all did. I mean, adopted the American cheap look. I don't know what you call it. Is like the shirts and all the business. And I remember I was with my mates and I said, check this out. And I put Peg on by Steely Dan. And then within about 20 seconds in unison, they all went, nope. And I was like, this is like the greatest band you're ever going to do. Like no.
I mean, I can understand. The thing about Steely Dan is that like they are so harmonically sophisticated too. So I can understand why younger music listeners, if they haven't gotten into that music, would have a harder time connecting to it. I mean, I wasn't a big Steely Dan fan of the more sophisticated stuff, especially in my younger years. I like Reelin' in the Years, but that's probably about the most popish tune of all, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Because I love like the Doobie Brothers and that kind of stuff. It's funny because so many people have said to me, especially about our vocal music, that's one of the most common comparisons people say about the vocal material on the new album. That's definitely one of the most common. Like, it reminds me of Steely Dan. I'm like, I never listened to that much Steely Dan, but I saw them live in 2019 in LA, and they were the best live band I've ever seen, I think. I mean, they really blew me away, like just killing. And this is after Walter had already passed, right? So it was just Donald Fagen. But just the whole band, like, it was Keith Carlock and Freddie Washington and and the background singers were perfect. And that stuff is so hard and so harmonically sophisticated, and they just killed it. So it was awesome to see live.
I managed to see him live. I think it's going on 15 years ago. And they're both there, Walter and Donald. And it's the first time I've ever seen a stage invasion at a gig. The guy
really?
Started running around them, and they were like, I don't know what to do. this big burly security guy just take him out. He was amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, Supernatural. That was the name of the Santana album. I just remember.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So obviously you sort of said you were learning in school music and piano. So did you sort of join bands? Were you in garage bands at the time? Was you out sort of gigging, or would you just practicing?
Yeah, so my story is my parents got a piano for my sister actually when I was 5, right? She's 2 years older than me. And I was the one that took interest in it. So actually I just used to go play around on the piano when I was like 5, 6, 7. Like I would spend like an hour making stuff up. I didn't know what I was doing. Like one of their friends had gone to University of Colorado. She was a classical piano major. So she showed me like the most basic rudiments. She showed me what a fifth was, right? So I was playing around with fifths, right? And I used to get really lost in it and like make stuff up. And I asked them for lessons. It took them a while to get me lessons. I didn't get lessons till I was just before I turned 9. So I guess like 3 years or a little more after they got the piano for my sister, who, by the way, only ended up taking lessons for a very brief time and after me. So it's interesting how that works. She was really into dance and gymnastics and whatever. And so I started with classical. I already, and children's stuff and whatever, but I always was improvising. So that was kind of like my most original kind of gift or whatever, was to make my own stuff up. So I was always doing that and writing. I was probably writing more like new age neoclassical stuff in my early years. I remember in junior high, I went to a school called Waldorf School. I don't know if you guys have that in the UK. It's a very arts oriented school.
Okay.
And we did, Midsummer's Night's Dream, right? The Shakespeare production. And I wrote a couple tunes for it. I actually wrote out the scores, and I don't know, I don't think I have them. I would love to see them. I wrote a minuet, like inspired by Bach. And so I was doing all that. And then because of the natural, like, inclination towards improvisation. It was just kind of natural that you end up getting into jazz. But I wasn't playing in bands. So what happened was I used to go to the music store like when I could get someone to take me. Because I used to go, we just had a piano at home, and I used to go love to play around with the keyboards. And this is, late 80s, early 90s. Keyboards weren't that advanced yet. Like Yamaha Clavinova was like the home digital piano, and then there was like, the early like Korg M1. This is even before the Korg O1W came out, keyboards. And Sonic was still around, and Sonic has been gone for a long time, right? So and I just used to love to go to the store and play around like with these other sounds. I'm like, oh man, I can play electric guitar. Like, how cool is that? Of course, so if I went back now, I'd be like, that sounds like garbage sample, but whatever. So I asked my parents to get a keyboard, and they said, well, and I was always pretty disciplined with practicing anyway, but they said if the next for like whatever it was, 2.5 or 3 months, if you practice every day right after school for an hour and 15 minutes before you do anything else, before you go to the park and play basketball or football with your friends, before you do homework, whatever, we'll loan you the money for keyboard, and you have to pay back 2/3 of it. Basically, they would pay a third. Yeah, I'd pay 2/3. So I was 14, so I got the keyboard, and where I'm from, Boulder, Colorado, it's a really cool town, college town. It's got this area downtown called the Pearl Street Mall, which is like a outdoor mall that's like brick walking area, right? So there's no cars on it. And for as long as I remember as a kid, there's always all kinds of performers out there. There'd be like acrobats and jugglers and musicians and whatever, right? So I used to see these guys were of course older than me, who go out there and play and sell CDs and whatever, and they were killing it and getting tips or whatever, and you could get a permit. So that's how I was like, okay, well, I got to pay them back. So I went out there to play for tips as a 14-year-old. And I would make like, this is in the 90s. I would make like a couple $100 a night in tips, like playing for a couple hours, and then people asked me to make a cassette, right? So I made a cassette when I was, I was still 14. It was like August of 1993. I made my first album at home, just direct to DAT, digital audio tape, if you remember what those are.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I got the start. I was never playing in bands. I had a couple friends in high school who were into bands. I went to school with a kid named Casey Sidwell. He's a bassist in Denver, and we keep in touch occasionally. We haven't played together in a long time, but I didn't really have a sense for playing in band situations. I had no experience with it, whatever. It wasn't until I moved to LA, and then I started my bands when I was 19, like a year after I moved here. And that was really my first experience, like playing in a band and learning. I had a couple situations where I played with other people, but I'd always been a soloist. So, man, it was a big learning curve to learn to, like, when you're a soloist, you're your own timekeeper. You're your own accompanist. So the time and groove and whatever can breathe and ebb and flow and pick up and slow down and, all that. Can't do that in a band, right? So it took me a long time to learn to you have to learn time and pocket and groove and that kind of stuff. And that was probably the biggest challenge for me. So, and then, with my band, it was always the case that everybody was always older than me, always more experienced, more schooled, had more credentials. A lot of them had, a lot of touring experience already, whatever. So I really learned kind of on the job, just getting my butt kicked, be honest. Yeah. Really great musicians who could really play. And if you're on stage, it's just kind of natural. It's like, well, someone takes solo, you got to take a solo. Like, you can either be embarrassed or you grow. And so, yeah, that's kind of my story.
I mean, that's amazingly brave for a 14-year-old to be out doing that. That's really great.
Yeah, I mean, I was always an entrepreneurial kid, right? Me and my sister always were. I mean, I never had a job. I basically never have had a real job in my life. I started playing music professionally at 14. I've never done anything else since. I'm now 46. So that's all I've ever done. Before that, like when we were little kids, my sister and I had a couple, we had different businesses, man. We had like a yard business. I would get, then I had a lawn mowing business. I did work in a piano restoration shop as an apprentice a little bit for a few years. A friend of my parents had a piano restoration shop. So I actually learned how to take apart pianos and adjust actions and replace key tops and all that kind of stuff, which is great to know, of course.
Yeah.
But beyond that, really never a real job. I've never gotten a W-2, which is our tax form for like a real job in my life. So it's pretty wild. Yeah.
That is fantastic.
That's not to say that it's always been easy. It hasn't, but here I am.
Like, I mean, obviously I was not successful as a musician. I used to play in bands back in the day. And we played the obligatory gig where there was a man and his dog and no one else in the venue. Did you have any of those sorts of experiences where there was no one there and you just kept playing, or did you ever get booed off stage? Did you get that sort of stuff, or was everyone kind of just warming?
Never. I've never been booed off stage. No, but every single musician I know has played to an empty room for sure. Thankfully that doesn't happen much these days. But that's a lot of years of work and whatever. But yeah, of course we all have. I mean, I remember, you might know of a venue called the Baked Potato here in LA. Super famous. Yeah. So that's one of our like regular homes here. We usually play there every couple of months, but the very first time I ever played there, it's an iconic LA venue among musicians. Like all the best players in LA have always played it. And the Baked Potato, right? Legends. I mean, Mike Stern will be there next month. Joe Bonamassa will be there next month. Like, it's this little intimate room, all the great session players, whatever. But the first time I played there, the drummer in the band booked us a show there. And I was viewing it as a warm-up show. We were playing at a big venue in Hollywood, which is no more, called Key Club, which was Billboard Live. Before that, it was a legendary Hollywood venue called Gazzari's on the Sunset Strip, right? The famed Sunset Strip, which isn't what it used to be. And I didn't really promote the Baked Potato, and I think we played to like 2 or 3 people. There was more people on stage than there was there, and it's kind of funny when I think back, because it's like, man, I didn't really know yet. I mean, I was so young. I didn't know really what the Baked Potato was. I didn't know what the lineage of it was. And I think at the end of the night, they handed me like $35 or something like that. That was our take of the door. Yeah. So whatever, I don't know. Whatever the cover was, maybe there were 6 people there. I don't know. Whatever our take of that was, maybe it was, I don't even remember what tickets were. $15 maybe? I don't know. So anyway, yeah.
For people that don't know, we should say the Baked Potato was owned by a session player whose name escapes me, that played on the Beach Boys records.
Don Randy.
Don Randy.
He's a member of the Wrecking Crew. His son Justin now owns it, and I'm proud to say now we play there all the time and always sell it out, and that's great. But it is funny to think back. This is 25 years ago, 99, maybe 98, and there's things you don't know.
just as a personal thing, have you met Don Randy? Have you met him?
Yeah, bet on. Yeah.
And is he lovely as he seems on the TV?
Yeah, he's a very nice guy. I don't know him well. A former bass player in the band is good buddies with him. So that's how I got to know Don a little bit. I haven't seen him in a while. They had a big 90th birthday thing I can't remember if it was, I don't think it was him. I think it was someone else from the Wrecking Crew, and I went down and saw him. But I've only seen Don play actually in person a couple of times.
Wow.
He still plays there though, I think. I don't know if it's even once a month now. It's always been once a month. He might be there once every other month. But yeah, I mean, legendary guy, man. And super nice. Yeah.
Adon, God only knows, didn't he, as well?
Yeah, I mean, the Wrecking Crew, I mean, I haven't seen the documentary on them, but there's a doc out, and man, the amount of records that those guys are on is, crazy.
Wonderful is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how old were you? Yeah, because no one got paid. So how old were you when you recorded your first album?
Well, I made that first solo keyboard home produced thing when I was 14, but my first like full production like studio album was 2001. So we recorded it in 99 and 2000. So I guess I was 21, 22. It came out when I was like 22. Yeah. Came out when I was 22. So yeah, I mean, that was the first one. And then we did another one a few years later. So the first was, and those first records were under just my name, Lao Tizer. So there were 2 under Lao Tizer. Then I changed the band name to Tizer for a couple of records. And then my former manager convinced me it needed to be changed back to the Lao Tizer Band. So the last couple have been under that. But they're all the same. It's all the same group. So yeah, so I guess the band has, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think 6 band records now. And then I also did another solo record in the middle of that as well that came out in 2009 called Passages. That was much more like an unplugged, like solo piano with some strings, nothing with like full band on it. You know what I mean? Percussion, a little bit of guitar, like whatever, that kind of stuff.
Because I was going through your albums and I couldn't work out who was what and who was what. So
Lao Tizer and the Lao Tizer Band are all the same band. It's just like changes in the billing, which, I mean, I wanted to go with Tizer way back in the day, way back in 99. And I wish I would have and just stuck with it just for a branding perspective. It'd be easier, but as you might hear from other musicians, a life or artists, a life in music and the business factors involved or whatever can have effects on things like that sometimes. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Your last album, Amplify, has just come out.
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic album. Gotta say, no, I'm not saying it because you're on the show. It's a fantastic album.
Thank you.
No problem. Obviously, I went into it blind, not having an idea of what your music was. Like, I decided to go backwards. So I did the last album and then go that way around to see what say mission.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was it just amazes me how different your career has been sort of for us up to the last album. And, it's not even a booking. You could say, like you say, different names. It could be a different artist every single time. It's amazing division. So I just want to know about, obviously, your earlier albums was mainly music based. And obviously,
all instrumental, right? Until only the last 2 have any vocal component to them.
Yeah. So when you're writing songs and parts now, do you write with a singer in mind, or do you just write the music and let the singer work or the lyrics work around itself?
Yeah. So on the new album Amplify, right, there's 5 original vocal tunes and then 4 original instrumentals, right? And so what happened was actually the previous album, Songs from the Swing House, was the first time I'd ever worked with a vocalist. And for that album, the concept was, I was like, I've always done only original music. I want to do 3 vocal covers, but do my own arrangements of them and pick stuff that's outside the box for a jazz fusion, contemporary jazz, whatever you want to call it, right, group to do. So we did a cover, Ramble On by Led Zeppelin, Pride in the Name of Love by U2, and then Sad Lisa by Cat Stevens, and really put our own spin on those tunes, like big time, especially Pride and Sad Lisa. Ramble On is a little closer to the original, but we still took a lot of liberties. And I actually was just so inspired working with a vocalist finally. And I was like, man, I want to write, like, this is fun. She's going to be on the road with us. Like, we should add some original vocal stuff to the, to the mix. And I would just, when I write ideas, whenever they come out, sometimes you just know right away. I like come up with ideas. I'm like, this is a perfect tune to do vocals with. Right. So I would write the music, and then she and I, and her name is Tita Hutchison. She and I would get together, and, she would like, she did more of the lyrics than I did, but we both talked about them, and then work on melodies and all that kind of stuff. And then, so now when I come up with ideas, it's so intuitive, really. Like, you just know, like, that tune's for vocals, this tune's for instrumental. Like, it just makes sense. Like, what most songs for me come out of some sort of a vamp or groove or chord progression feel, something like that idea. So early on, it's easy to kind of be like, man, that's a great vibe to put a vocal over. So our vocalist now is Elliot Yamin, right? Who a lot of people know. He made a very deep run on American Idol. Super great, like very R&B, blue-eyed soul kind of vibe, right? He's got a little husk in his voice, like a little Michael McDonald-esque, vibe. A lot of people say he sounds like Stevie Wonder too, which that's quite a comparison and compliment, I would say. There's some comments on the YouTube videos actually that are out. You'll see some people like, say that, or on Facebook comments on video posts, whatever. So, he really took the songs in the direction where I felt they should be. Like, the songs were stylistically quite R&B kind of oriented, or R&B jazz. One's really just a blues. That tune, New Orleans, is like a 12/8 blues shuffle, like with some kind of slightly hipper harmony, but so he really took it. And so now it's time for he and I to co-write some stuff. And I've got a whole bunch of ideas, vamp ideas. We just need to get together and work on it. But, on top of it all, so we tour a lot. I'm also independent artist, like it's my label, and I book all the shows too. So I'm like, and I'm a dad and a husband. So I've got a 2.5-year-old daughter at home, and my wife. And so, and his daughter is exactly 2 years older than my daughters and their buddies. So it's a little harder to carve out the time than it used to be, but we'll be working on some new vocal material for sure. But that's kind of the story of how vocals came into the group. And as always has been the case for me, the evolutions in the band were always just very intuitive, just kind of naturally happened. Like, I can't tell you why finally in 2016, I felt, after all these years, like I want to do something with vocals. I had always been so strictly instrumental and dead set against it. My cousins, who I'm super close with, have been saying for like 20 years, dude, you got to put vocals in. And I'm like, it's not what I do. I don't sing, and whatever. And here I am now, the latest album, finally, after all these years, there's an album that's actually more than 50% vocal. So it just goes to show, if you stay true to your muse and follow the path that's in you, you just don't know where you're going to end up.
It's true. What I love about the album is there's so much on it, and there's so much stuff I didn't expect as well. Like the Shades of Lullaby got this crazy sax solo. Boulevard of Stars is amazing, and it's I mean, no problem. To me, that was an R&B track straight away.
Yes, I agree totally.
And you sort of said about Elliot sounding like Stevie Wonder. That was my first impression, and I was thinking to myself, if you'd white labeled that and said, we found this vinyl of this track, Boulevard of Stars, we think it's a Stevie Wonder early demo from Inner Visions or Music Book. Right. Said to people, what do you think? I think they would have said, oh, wow, we've found something new. And
probably should try and say that. We'd sell a few more copies, I think.
That's not to say that it's so close to Stevie Wonder it's not your music, but what I mean is you can hear the influence in it, and you can hear that the vocals are so Stevie Wonder as well, and it makes it just a wonderful track. And right at the end there, you've got Lullaby to play the album out. You've got a lovely little song at the end as well, and the fact you've got the 50-50 really works well. Like, sometimes you can get an instrumental track on an album, and like a bit like George Harrison with the Indian stuff, and you go, oh, not that one, but but you've got such a lovely flow to your album that it's a welcome break from the vocals, and it just works in a lovely flow. No problem. And you've got everything, including the kitchen sink, in there at some point for somebody. I don't think I would fail for anybody to find an album, this track, they didn't like. And I'm not saying that loosely. It's true. It's
I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I I feel like even though it's a diverse album and there's a lot of flavors in it,
Mm.
because it's all my music and compositions, there is a through line in the sense of harmony and sense of melody and whatever. And I like, it features everybody, the band is chock full of badasses, right? A bunch of super well-known musicians who, many of them have their own albums out and are, artists in their own right as well. And so I just believe in the ensemble concept of things, right? So it's like the vocals, the instrumentals, and just kind of weaving it together, pacing it out so it takes a listener on a bit of a journey. And I think we accomplished that. And so that makes me really proud. And yeah, I mean, I think there's something, if you're someone that leans more towards like instrumental jazz, there's that stuff for you. If you're someone that leans more towards R&B vocals, there's that stuff for you. And after your ears are opened up by those, maybe you'll be like, oh, like I never really listened to instrumental music, but this is really cool, right? So, hopefully that's what people take away from it. And there's some stories, Lullaby. I guess, most people don't have CDs these days, so they don't have the liner notes, but Lullaby, actually, I wrote that while my wife was pregnant with our daughter.
Oh, wow.
And I played it basically every day through her pregnancy at home. And I always thought it was just for me. Like I was just a thing I wrote. And the night she was born, I played it. There's a piano in the hospital. It was kind of a traumatic delivery. Took like 30 hours. She ended up having to have like kind of an urgent C-section. And finally my daughter's there, and then, they're stitching my wife up and she's just kind of coming back to reality. And finally at 2:30 in the morning, I have a moment to like, okay, I can go breathe, right? After like hours and hours of it being kind of stressful. And I went down to the lobby of the hotel. They have a little baby grand piano. There's nobody down there except security guard and these super high ceilings and marble floors. And I played the song and it was like, I'll never forget that moment. And then I kind of let it go. And then I actually, a couple months before I did the record, Chieli Minucci, the guitarist in the band, was here for some shows with us in Southern California, and he was staying with us. And I was just playing it that morning. I hadn't played it in a while. And he's like, what is that? And he's like, man, that's like, you got to do something with that. And I never thought I would. And then so it turned into that. And yeah, it's kind of a full circle moment to wrap up the record with it for me. And I like to share the story because it means a lot. It's, so that is, definitely dedicated to my wife and daughter.
That's wonderful. And it definitely journeys the album to the end. You've kind of got this high energy in the middle.
Right.
And you've got the lyrics, you've got some proper soul. And it's just like that sort of like, you can go to sleep now. It's that sort of like wind down to the end of the album.
Yeah. And sometimes on shows, especially club shows, when it's like, people want an encore, we've already played like 75 minutes of high octane intensity. There's been a lot of notes. There's been a lot of fiery solos. And a lot of times I'll wind it down with that, like as an encore, just solo piano or whatever. And people really respond. Sometimes Danny, the saxophonist, and I will do it as a duo as well. It's not the kind of tune that would be easy to do on a big outdoor festival stage, because you kind of got to keep the energy up and keep people engaged in that setting. But in the clubs, man, and then people always come up and they're like, I love the story. And, so yeah, I do feel like it's sometimes there's, as the saying goes, it's good to leave people wanting more. So hopefully something that's a little more understated like that does that, and also conveys a real vibe, Yeah,
it's a very intimate song as well. So in a big venue, it wouldn't work. Yeah, you're right. It's very intimate. So obviously, you were saying you're going to work on some new material. Obviously, we've got lyricists now. We've got a bigger band, and obviously, you've got the jazz in the background. Would you sort of aim towards the 3.5 minute single now, or are you going to keep it just free form and just see what happens when you write?
I'm leaning. My writing has started to lean more and more, although maybe people don't notice it, to like actually less through composed music. Like I've been trying to do more of that. Like some of the tunes on the album don't even have bridges, which is unusual for me. I always, and throughout my history, there's some pretty through composed stuff. So yeah, I mean, I would like to, just in the interest of changing things up and giving yourself different challenges, to make a big statement in a short time, I think is a good challenge. And, I like to kind of try different things. So I'm sure we'll probably do some stuff. Elliot comes much more from a pop R&B background. Like when we were buddies long before he joined the band, and when he first joined, he was, he hadn't sung stuff that was like this harmonically involved that much, right? And so he was a little maybe uncomfortable or a little intimidated by it, but man, he owned it and really grew. And I think it's opened up a side of him. It'll be interesting to see when we write together, like for some new stuff, where it leads. But yeah, I mean, I think just in the interest of accessibility, it'd probably be wise to have a couple short tunes on there. We do like to have these, even though like some of the tunes like Shades of Love is actually a very R&B accessible kind of tune, but it's got an intense solo section, then this big drum solo at the end. So it's actually the longest song on the record. Even though it's, it could have probably been a more like R&B radio-ish kind of song. So we'll see where it leads with the new stuff. I mean, I always like one thing that was great about this album that I want to do for future albums, and it's something I'd always wanted to do, and this is the first time I've really been able to do it for, is have the material in the show and tour it for a while. Because what happens when the band really like plays music and has time to get inside it and take chances and grow and evolve, you get so much more familiar with the tunes. So only two of them were like really new to the set. The Labyrinth was the last one. We added that to the show like 5 weeks before, but still we had a bunch of shows. So it was probably performed 10 times. And Lullaby, those were the two that were both added like a month, 5 weeks before. So they didn't have as much mileage, but everything else, the vocal tunes were all in the show right before the pandemic. We had had the last couple right before the pandemic hit. So we had a lot of mileage on them. And so they grow and evolve. And that I think is a real blessing to be able to do. I mean, it's fun to try it the other way too. Of course, to be like, you write a song, you teach it to the band, you record it, and then you go out and tour it. And so like the album version is not as evolved as what ends up happening down the line. But I still think like for the kind of music we do, I think it's really served well by like getting that mileage. And then, when we tour, we play in all these different configurations too. So the songs are different every night. So we're taking chances, we're exploring things, and that I think really lends itself to the tunes evolving and also speaks to why we were able to knock out that ambitious of a project. Because I don't know if you've seen the videos.
Yeah.
Well, so right, it was all recorded and filmed all simultaneously, 7 cameras. We did all 9 songs in 2 days. So it's pretty ambitious, you know what I mean? So it was, that's pretty cool. And I think because we had so much mileage touring them, we were able to actually even accomplish that, because with a footprint that big, to do 5 songs one day and 4 songs another day is, with all the other stuff going on with 7 camera operators and lighting changes and all kinds of stuff, it's ambitious, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, that's something that I love doing, but I'll only undertake it every so often.
The young men.
For my own sanity and survival. So yeah.
That's amazing. So obviously you've got plans for a new album, touring next year. You're gonna be touring over the place. Are you gonna come to the UK as well at some point? Maybe.
God, I hope so, man. I just need to find some time to work on it. I've had a bunch of people request us over there for years, actually.
Nice.
We got to get over there. I mean, it'd be awesome to come do, like, of course, Ronnie Scott's or Jazz Cafe or some of the festivals, right? So hopefully next year. I mean, it's definitely something I just need to set aside time and prioritize and hook up with a good European agent who can help over there. I mean, we have been to Europe a couple times, but not to the UK. And just because there's only so much time in the day, I can't handle everything. So we definitely want to. And I've done a bunch of interviews with this album with people in the UK, and they're saying, come over. So we got to get over this. So hopefully 2025, we'll crack into the market. And I think it'll, be well received. I certainly hope so.
Definitely. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. If people want to find out more about it, where's the best places to get your details?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So if you go to my website, which is just myname.com, that's spelled LaoTizer, so laotizer.com. You can link to all the social media platforms there too. Obviously we're on Facebook. You can search for the Lao Tizer Band. On Instagram, you can follow Lao Tizer, and then you can see all the videos. They're both on the website or on YouTube. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And yeah, we tour a lot. And hopefully we'll do a lot more international stuff next year and in 2026. I wasn't really chomping at the bit to do international stuff. Coming out of the pandemic, my wife was pregnant. There was still COVID restrictions. I'm like, I don't really want to go overseas and then get stuck for 2 weeks with a baby at home. Like if I test positive or, whatever, like it was, now everything's back to normal. Thank God. Let's hope it stays that way. And, so yeah, I'm itching to get over to Europe a lot more. It'd be great to come to the UK and I think people will really connect with it. And, so looking forward to that.
Fantastic. I'll have links to the website and the album on the bottom so people can find it. Thanks for coming on. It's been brilliant.
My pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate the time, man. And thanks for supporting. And thanks to everybody over there for listening or wherever you are. I mean, the beauty of the internet could be people listening anywhere. So.